When armed men stormed the factory looking for stolen government property, quiet worker Jake Morrison's 20-year cover was about to be blown. What happened next would reveal that the most dangerous man in the building wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying secrets that could reshape international intelligence operations forever. Jake Morrison had perfected the art of invisibility over 20 years at Precision Manufacturing. He arrived at exactly 7:45 each morning, clocked in without conversation, performed his duties with competent mediocrity, and left at precisely 4:15 each afternoon. His co-workers knew him as reliable but unremarkable, the kind of employee who never caused problems and never drew attention. What they didn't know was that Jake Morrison was the most wanted man in international intelligence. The irony wasn't lost on Jake that he had become genuinely skilled at manufacturing work during his 2 decades of deep cover. What had started as an elaborate charade had evolved into legitimate expertise in industrial processes. He understood machinery, quality control, and production efficiency with the thoroughness of someone who had lived the role completely. But underneath that ordinary exterior was Michael Santos, a ghost who had been presumed dead for 20 years. On November 3rd, Jake's carefully constructed world began to crack. He was calibrating a precision cutting machine when he noticed unusual activity in the administrative offices. Men in expensive suits were meeting with plant management, their posture and movements screaming military or law enforcement backgrounds. Jake's operational instincts, dormant but never truly inactive, began analyzing the situation with automatic precision. Something was wrong. During lunch break, Jake employed surveillance techniques he hadn't used in years to gather intelligence about the visitors. Their vehicles carried government plates, but not from any agency he could identify through casual observation. The men themselves moved with the controlled awareness of professionals accustomed to potentially hostile environments. Most concerning was their apparent interest in employee records and facility security protocols. They were looking for someone. Jake's cover identity had been meticulously constructed by intelligence professionals who understood the importance of deep background verification. Jacob Morrison was completely legitimate, with authentic employment history, social security records, and even a believable personal life, including an ex-wife and a mortgage. The identity could withstand reasonable investigation because it wasn't fabricated. It was real, just not originally his. But Jake recognized the signs of an investigation that might go beyond reasonable. If these visitors represented resources that could penetrate classified databases or conduct forensic analysis of identity construction, his 20-year masquerade could be compromised. The question was whether they were looking specifically for him or conducting a broader sweep that might accidentally expose him. Either way, his peaceful existence was in danger. The afternoon shift brought answers Jake had hoped never to receive. Tom Rodriguez, the plant's security chief, approached his workstation with obvious nervousness. When Tom told him that federal agents wanted to speak with him, asking questions about his background and computer access, Jake's response was perfectly calibrated to match his established personality. Mild confusion mixed with cooperative concern. But internally, he was assessing escape routes and communication protocols he hadn't needed for 2 decades. The federal agents introduced themselves as Patterson and Wells from Homeland Security. Their questions began routinely, focusing on Jake's employment history and computer activity. But Jake detected subtle probing techniques designed to identify inconsistencies in background stories. These weren't standard security investigators. They were specialists trained to uncover deep cover operatives. They suspected something. Agent Patterson's questioning technique suggested experience with interrogating intelligence personnel. When he asked about Jake's hobbies, language knowledge, and travel history, it was with systematic approach that indicated comprehensive preparation. Agent Wells focused on technical questions about the factory's computer systems, probing for knowledge that might exceed what a standard employee should possess. They were testing him. Jake maintained his cover perfectly, providing responses that aligned with Jacob Morrison's established history while carefully monitoring the agent's reactions. But he noticed micro-expressions and body language that suggested they weren't entirely convinced by his performance. The investigation was more sophisticated than a routine security check. Someone had given them specific information to look for. The questioning was interrupted by commotion from the factory floor. Shouts, running footsteps, and what sounded like equipment being overturned suggested a significant disturbance. Agent Patterson's radio crackled with urgent communication that Jake couldn't quite decipher, but the agent's immediate alertness indicated a serious development. Then came the sound that changed everything. Gunfire. Through the office window, Jake observed armed men in tactical gear moving through the factory floor with military precision. They weren't law enforcement. Their equipment, movement patterns, and coordination suggested private military contractors. The federal agents drew their weapons and began coordinating what appeared to be a defensive response to an unexpected threat. But Jake knew this wasn't random. They were here for him. Agent Wells spoke urgently into his radio, reporting that their location was under attack by unknown hostile forces. Jake realized that whatever investigation had brought the agents to precision manufacturing had been compromised, possibly by the same people now conducting an armed assault on the facility. His 20-year cover was being blown not by investigative discovery but by hostile action. Someone wanted him dead or captured. The factory's emergency alarm system activated as gunfire erupted from the main production area. Jake's operational training assessed the tactical situation automatically. The attacking force had superior numbers and equipment, while the federal agents were caught unprepared for armed confrontation. Standard procedure would be evacuation and backup, but the attackers' positioning suggested they intended to prevent anyone from leaving. This was a capture operation. Jake Morrison made a decision that would end his carefully maintained civilian identity forever. When Agent Patterson ordered him to remain in the office for safety, Jake instead moved toward the window, providing observation of the factory floor. His analysis of the attackers' deployment revealed tactical errors that could be exploited, but only by someone with specific military training. He couldn't maintain his cover and survive. Agent Wells noticed Jake's professional assessment of the tactical situation. When he commented that Jake seemed remarkably calm for a civilian caught in an armed assault, Jake's response was carefully measured. He acknowledged fear while demonstrating controlled thinking that might be explained by military service in his background. But it was too late for half measures. When one of the attackers advanced toward their office building, Jake's cover dissolved entirely. He identified optimal firing positions, calculated angles of approach, and warned the agents about tactical vulnerabilities with precision that no civilian should possess. Agent Patterson's expression shifted from suspicion to recognition as he realized Jake Morrison was not who he appeared to be. The masquerade was over. The attacking force's leader was coordinating his team's movements using sophisticated communication equipment and displaying tactical knowledge that suggested professional military training. Jake recognized some of the techniques being employed. They were adapted from special operations procedures he had once helped develop during his intelligence career. These people knew exactly who they were hunting. Agent Wells received an update through his radio, that made the situation even more complex. When he reported that the attackers were searching for something specific in the factory, demanding access to employee records and computer systems, Jake understood completely. They weren't conducting a random assault. They were looking for Michael Santos, and they had finally tracked him to precision manufacturing. Jake's operational analysis concluded that the attack was specifically connected to his presence at the factory. Someone had discovered his location and was attempting to capture or eliminate him using overwhelming force. The federal investigation had been either coincidental timing or deliberately triggered to flush him into the open where hostile forces could act. Either way, he was trapped. Agent Patterson's tactical assessment reached the same conclusion. When he told Jake that whoever these people were, they were here for him, demanding to know exactly who he was and why a private army was trying to kill him, Jake Morrison looked at the federal agents and made the calculation that had governed his survival for decades. Truth shared with potential allies was preferable to secrets maintained until death. Jake Morrison identified himself using a code name that made both agents' faces go pale with recognition. He was Michael Santos, a deep-cover operative who had been presumed dead for 20 years following the collapse of Operation Nightfall. His survival had been classified at levels that made his very existence a matter of national security. And now everyone who wanted him dead had found him. Agent Wells immediately activated a secure communication protocol reserved for intelligence emergencies. The revelation transformed their tactical situation entirely. Jake's intelligence background included specialized training in asymmetric warfare, counter-surveillance, and exactly the kind of defensive operations they now needed to survive. But his knowledge also made him a target for foreign intelligence services that had spent decades trying to locate him. Agent Patterson coordinated with backup units, while Jake analyzed the attackers' equipment and tactics to identify their likely employers. The weapons, communication gear, and operational procedures suggested a specific private military corporation that worked for governments willing to conduct deniable operations against American intelligence assets. But Jake had advantages they didn't know about. Jake's assessment of their defensive options was grimly professional. When he explained that the attackers had positioned themselves to control all conventional exits, possessed superior firepower, and appeared prepared for extended tactical operations, the agents realized they were facing a professional military assault. But Jake also revealed that the attackers had made the crucial error of assuming their target was an unprepared civilian, rather than a trained operative with detailed knowledge of the facility. Over the next hour, Jake Morrison demonstrated why he had been considered irreplaceable during his intelligence career. Using his intimate knowledge of the factory's layout, he guided the federal agents through a defensive strategy that neutralized the attackers' numerical advantage. His 20 years of observing the facility's daily operations provided tactical intelligence that no outside force could have anticipated. The factory became his fortress. The private military team discovered that their carefully planned assault had become a trap. Jake's modifications to factory equipment over 2 decades had created concealed defensive positions, improvised weapons, and communication systems that transformed the industrial facility into a fortress designed by someone who understood both manufacturing and warfare. The hunters had become the hunted. When backup federal units finally arrived, they found a scene that would require extensive classified briefing to explain. The attackers had been systematically defeated by defensive tactics that demonstrated professional military expertise applied through intimate knowledge of industrial systems. Jake Morrison had revealed himself to be far more dangerous than any weapon the attacking force had brought. The quiet factory worker was gone forever. Agent Patterson's after-action report would describe one of the most sophisticated defensive operations ever conducted by a single intelligence operative using improvised resources. Jake Morrison had protected himself, the investigating agents, and dozens of civilian factory workers using skills that supposedly didn't exist in official records. But the cost was his cover, his identity, and his peaceful life. Jake understood that his 20-year masquerade was permanently finished. The attack would trigger investigations that would uncover his true identity and force a return to the intelligence world he had tried to leave behind. His quiet life as a factory worker was ending, but his value as an intelligence asset was just beginning to be rediscovered. Michael Santos was alive, and that changed everything. As federal security teams secured the facility, Jake Morrison began the process of reclaiming an identity he had buried so deeply that even he had sometimes forgotten who he really was. The factory worker had disappeared, but Michael Santos had returned to a world that had changed dramatically during his 20 years in hiding, and the people who wanted him dead weren't going to stop trying. The stolen government property the attackers had been seeking wasn't hidden in the factory. It was the knowledge contained in Jake Morrison's mind. Intelligence that multiple governments would kill to obtain or prevent from being revealed. His cover had been blown, but his real mission was just beginning. And this time, there would be no place to hide. The quiet factory worker who had spent 20 years blending into the background was about to become the most important intelligence asset in American history. But first, he had to survive long enough to share what he knew. And the people hunting him had resources that made today's attack look like a training exercise. This incredible story required extensive research to ensure accuracy in its tactical and intelligence details. If you enjoyed discovering the truth behind Jake Morrison's hidden identity, make sure to subscribe to Untold Legends Stories for more amazing tales of ordinary people with extraordinary secrets. Hit that notification bell and let us know in the comments what you thought of this incredible revelation. We publish new stories every day, and tomorrow's tale will show you that sometimes the most dangerous people are hiding in plain sight. Your support means everything to us,